Hello, my name is Kate Davies and I'm an interpreter on staff at the European Commission. I work in the English booth and I work from Spanish, French and Portuguese to English and English to Spanish. Now today I'd like to talk to you about something that's really very challenging, and this is called simultaneous interpretation with text. Now for those of you who are actually studying interpretation, I'm sure you have heard about this already. But for those of you who are not very familiar with these terms, let me explain what it is. Interpretation, as you know, is translating, as it were, giving a message that is delivered in one language and delivering it in another language, reformulating. You listen, you analyze, you think about it very carefully, and then you deliver the message in your target language, as it's called. And all of this happens very quickly. This means, therefore, that your brain is working super fast. It's in supercharged mode, cognitive load, all sorts of processes going on, all sorts of things, and you can get quite stressed. Well, simultaneous with text makes it even worse. This is considered to be the most advanced form of simultaneous, because it is the highest level of multitasking in doing simultaneous interpretation. Now, simultaneous with text means exactly that you are listening to a speaker, but the speaker is reading a text. And if you're lucky, you have a copy of the text too. Now, some people say, lucky to have the text? No, the text is a distraction. I say, no, it's a good thing to have the text, because the text can help you to work even better, despite the stress, despite all the different sorts of inputs and multitasking going on. But let me just stop for a moment and dwell on the advantages and the disadvantages of having the text, because, as I said, some people think that the text is a distraction. And why so? Well, normally when you're doing simultaneous interpretation, you're listening to a speaker, you're processing, and you're speaking. When you have the text, there's an additional input, a visual input. So that makes it more difficult, and people tend to get stuck in the text, and their eyes tend to get stuck in words, and therefore they fall behind the speaker. They're not able to keep up, they get lost and frustrated. Now, if you know how to handle the text in simultaneous interpretation with text, you would be able to overcome all of those problems and use the text as a tool to help you to improve your delivery, and above all, to help your accuracy as well. So the advantages of having the text is that when you have the text, and particularly if you've had time to prepare it, the text will help you with anticipation of knowing ahead what the speaker is going to say, generally speaking, because I must add that speakers are quite free to change their speech. And sometimes you have the text of a speech, the speaker is reading it out, and all of a sudden you don't understand what the speaker is saying anymore because you don't see it in the text. But you can learn how to deal with that as well. So the advantages are the text can help you to anticipate where the speaker is going, to know what the speaker's real intentions are. And the text can help you if the speaker has a very strong accent. Because, you know, in English and French, there are many different accents. In other languages too, there are many different accents. And sometimes we're accustomed to one type, a very British accent or a very American accent. But imagine, there are accents from all over the world. There are African speakers speaking English, people from the Caribbean speaking English, and from other parts of the world. So the text can help you with accents. But also, equally importantly, the text can help you with details, factual details, such as numbers and names and acronyms that sometimes are a bit difficult to catch. Because one of the problems of a speaker reading a text is that very often the speaker reads very quickly. We all tend to do it. We have a text and we become monotonous, we read and we speed up as we read, and this makes life extremely difficult for the poor interpreter trying to follow. Well, if you've prepared the text, even if the reader is going at top speed, you will be able to pinpoint certain key parts of the text, certain stepping stones, as I call them, through the text that will help you to follow the speaker and to keep up. And these stepping stones, as I said, are things like the numbers, the names, the acronyms, and so on. But before we look at how you prepare the text, because I'd like to share that with you, when you're thinking about learning how to use a text in simultaneous interpretation, it's very important to understand that there are different types of meetings in which texts are read, and there are different types of texts as well. For instance, there are very formal, high-level meetings in which very formal speeches are delivered. Think, for instance, of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony or a summit here in the European Union. But then you also have other types of meetings, such as technical meetings, medical congresses, scientific meetings, in which researchers are presenting their years of research in a study, and they come with a text which they read very quickly, and it's dense and technical. So if you have a text and if you've been able to prepare it, then it will help you to deal with that kind of speech as well. There are many other types of meetings in which texts are used, opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies, and so on. Speeches such as lectures in university, sometimes in multilingual classroom settings, interpreters have to work from lectures. Now, there are also different, what I call, preparation time scenarios, in which, depending on when you receive the text, you will be able to handle the preparation of the text appropriately. But this changes depending, as I said, on when you receive the text. Based on research that we have done, we have been able to identify, generally speaking, 4 preparation time scenarios, let's call them that. The one which is ideal is when you receive a copy of the text, say, a week before the meeting, and even up to a day before. That gives you enough time still to prepare the text. That's ideal, but unfortunately that doesn't happen very often. I think a more normal situation is when you receive the text, say, half an hour before your meeting. Interpreters always have to turn up to their meetings, not only on time, but generally speaking, early, especially if you know that it's a meeting in which there are going to be a lot of speeches. You should turn up very early and see if you can find copies of the speeches. Maybe they're sometimes in the booth already for you. If not, sometimes you have to go looking for them, or the head of team will go looking for them. So the normal situation is you have copies of the speeches, the text, about half an hour before, and you prepare them. Depending on the number of speeches you have to prepare, you can prepare them quite well. Then the third time preparation scenario is what we call the rush scenario. And that's when, unfortunately, you get the speech perhaps only 10 minutes, 5 minutes before the meeting is to start. And you may have more than one speech to prepare as well. So you have to rush, because that's not a lot of time. But still, in the rush scenario, you can still prepare the text to some extent and still use it in your interpretation. And then the last scenario is what I call the crisis. And that is when you don't get the text of the speech until sometimes the speaker has begun speaking already, and you have to be interpreting without following the text, and suddenly somebody rushes into the booth with a copy of the text and throws it at you. And oh my gosh, what do you do with that? That's a crisis. But do you know, it is possible still to use the text even in the crisis situation. What I'd like to do, though, is to talk about how you annotate the texts in the different scenarios that I have just mentioned. In the ideal scenario, you have the text, you have it at home, you can do all the preparation and background reading and glossaries, preparing your word lists, everything you need to do. I must tell you that regardless of the preparation and the time scenario, I always use certain tools. And here they are. I use my markers and multicolored pens. I think most interpreters use markers and pens. What I would advise against is using pencils. Because a pencil, you can't really see it very clearly. And you do need something that will stand out, that will draw your attention. Because when a speaker is reading very quickly, you don't need to be trying desperately to see what's on the page because it's too faint. No, no, no. Okay, so let's see. I use a marker, I use a blue, black, red and green pen for different things. Mind you, in annotating the text, I don't want it to look like a Christmas tree either. So I use them sparingly. But what do I highlight in the text? Annotation means highlighting. It means writing in little, sometimes translations of little phrases that you might find tricky and you've thought about and you'd like to put them in. It may mean, as I said, highlighting numbers and names. One thing you should not do, however, if you receive the text well ahead, in the ideal situation, is translate it fully. Please, that's a waste of time. Don't translate the text. And you know why? Because you may have done a brilliant translation, all typed out, ready to use it, and the speaker changes half the speech. And in any case, if you work with a translation, pre-translated text, it tends to distract your attention, and very often you stop listening to the speaker. And the most important thing in doing simultaneous with text is, just as in doing straight simultaneous interpretation, is to listen to the speaker and to follow very carefully and closely what the speaker is saying. When I say closely, I'm not saying don't stick too closely to the speaker. You have to have your distance to listen and to analyze. But what I mean is that you won't have the temptation to stop listening to the speaker and just read the text. So I suggest that you start off looking at the beginning of your text and at the end of your text. The opening and the closing paragraphs, they're always the most important. You know why? Because that's the first impression and the last impression. And your listeners will feel more reassured and convinced if you do a good job on the opening paragraph and if you do a really excellent job on the closing paragraph. That is not to say that in between the two, you shouldn't do a good job as well. Obviously, you have to focus to get your interpretation must be as accurate and complete as possible. However, beginning and end. Then, I suggest you, depending on the time you have, you skim through or read the document. If you have lots of time, read the text. If you don't have a lot of time, skim it. And as you skim, you highlight with your marker the various things that I've mentioned, the stepping stones that will help to take you through the text. This is true whatever the time preparation scenario, but particularly in the rush scenario. There you really have to learn to skim ahead and just highlight what is essential, what you think would cause an obstacle to you. Apart from the names, numbers, acronyms, things like quotations, things like proverbs, little things that are tricky, or a little reference in another language that you may not be totally familiar with. Things like that. You need to pick up and decide what you're going to do with them if you have time before starting. In the crisis scenario, when the speech has been brought into you, don't panic. Don't panic. Whatever you do, don't panic. A lot of people say that they prefer to put the speech away. Well, to be honest, I say keep the speech in front of you and try, while you're interpreting, to see if you can find the spot where the speaker is in the text. And here is where teamwork is very important. If your colleague is in the booth with you and working from the same language, give the text to your colleague first to see if they can spot where the speaker is. And then, when you have found the spot, you can use the text, use it to spot names and numbers, and even if it is going so fast that you can't do that, hold on to it as a psychological support. So, regardless of the situation, the text is always useful. And I hope you'll be able to learn how to use them and use them properly in your work. Thank you.